Few wasp names strike as much fear in the heart of beekeepers as does the name Vespa velutina. Vespa, the genus, velutina, the species. This particular hornet goes by a lot of different common names depending on where you are around the world. Here in the US, we call it the yellow-legged hornet. I'm going to stick to that common name, but I think it's actually safer for me to use just the species name, because depending on where you are listening to this video, that's how you would be able to find more information about this hornet, by looking for its species name. Again, that would be velutina. So Vespa, the genus, velutina, the species. I'll be using the species name velutina throughout to remove any ambiguity. Why is this hornet, why is this wasp so bad? Well, it's bad because of its biology. So let me talk a little bit about the biology of this particular wasp, because that will help you understand the threat that it poses to honeybee hives. And I'm going to start at the beginning of the calendar year, recognizing that those of us in the Northern Hemisphere have winter in January, those of you in the Southern Hemisphere have summer in January. But just keep in mind that I'm going to go by the calendar year starting as if January is winter all around the world. Okay, so in January, in winter in the Northern Hemisphere, the queen velutina is overwintering in some sort of substrate. It may be soil, rotten wood, something like that. Now that queen has mated the previous fall. So she doesn't have to mate again. She's got sperm in her body. She's overwintering as a single individual. And when spring comes, that queen will come out of hibernation. She will find a location and build a first small nest. That nest is about the size of a grapefruit. Now, she will build that paper ball that's the nest. She'll go into that paper ball and build the comb. She'll lay the first few eggs, and she will be responsible for foraging for food that she gives to those offspring while they are developing. Once that first round of workers emerges from the comb, they will take over the duties that the queen was performing. They'll forage for food, they'll feed the offspring, they'll build a bigger nest, they'll defend that nest, so forth. And the queen will just simply stay behind in that nest and take over exclusive egg-laying duties. Now, at this point, the nest is really small. We tend to call this the embryo nest. Some people might call it, as it grows a little bit, a primary nest. But nevertheless, this is a nest that is small. It's usually somewhat low to the ground, a few meters. In fact, here in the US where this wasp has occurred, people have seen it under the eaves of houses. And as that nest begins to grow, there's more and more offspring being produced. There's more and more individuals emerging from those combs. The nest is growing. Once it hits a critical mass, the entire colony in that nest will relocate to an area usually at the top of a very, very tall tree, many, many, many meters in the air. So they've transitioned from that primary nest in early to mid-spring to that secondary nest in later spring, maybe early summer. The secondary nest is usually located very, very high up on a tree, so it's much more difficult for humans to see. And the secondary nest is when the colony contained within is just in growth mode. It grows and grows and grows. There may be thousands of cells in that nest. There could be thousands of individuals that compose the colony that lives in the nest. And throughout the summer, those hornets are hunting for food, bringing back to the nest, feeding the offspring. The nest is growing. In late summer, but more so in early fall, the population of that nest begins to dwindle, and they transition from producing more worker offspring to producing the reproductive offspring. Those would be the drones and the queens. Well, once they have drones and queens, those drones and queens go out and mate with other drones and queens available in the environment. The nest will dwindle over late fall, and the colony within it completely dies out, usually by the end of fall. So what you have left then is all of these queen reproductives that have mated with the drones in the environment that are now looking for a place in late fall, early winter to overwinter. They're going back into rotten logs, holes in the ground, maybe soil, things like that. There they overwinter, come out, and next spring and the cycle starts all over again. So Again, just to paint a quick picture, in winter you've got single overwintering queens. They come out and start an initial nest, an embryo nest that develops to a slightly bigger primary nest. Then they relocate in later spring, early summer to this secondary area that we call a secondary nest. It's typically very high in the tree, and it's a really strong colony throughout summer and begins to dwindle in late summer, early fall when they begin investing in fall in the production of reproductives, queens and drones. Once the queens mate, they will migrate away from their original nest, find a place to overwinter. That's a snapshot of the biology. So why are these things such a problem for honeybee colonies? Well, there's really two important pieces of information I've left out when talking to you about the biology of this hornet. And those two pieces of information are what make them such a problem for honeybee colonies. And those two pieces of information all deal with diet. The adult wasps and the immature wasps eat things that the honeybee colony offers. What do they eat? Well, adult wasps generally feed on nectar or other sugar sources. The immature wasp feed on protein that's provided to them from the adult wasp that are foraging for it. So the adult wasps canvass the environment. They sting soft-bodied organisms, usually other insects, chew up their prey, and fly that prey back to the nest where they feed their offspring. So their offspring's eating the protein, the meat that the adults were collecting on their behalf. So throughout spring and early summer, you get an abundance of prey in the environment where the Vespa velutina, they're out there collecting this prey. Some of their prey at that point in the year also is the honeybee. Honeybee colonies are static prey items that are abundant organisms available for Vespa velutina to harvest. If they're not collecting them in spring and early summer, they're certainly collecting them in mid to late summer and early fall when they become the dominant prey item available in the environment. Some research has suggested that as much as 40% or more of Vespa velutina's diet, even in early spring and summer, can be from honeybee colonies. But typically speaking, you start seeing them show up at honeybee colonies in late spring and early summer, and then you get a large mass of these things foraging at honeybee colonies in midsummer and late summer and early fall. So honeybee colonies are sitting there. They provide all the protein resources that these hornets want so that they can take back to their nest and feed to their offspring. So how do you know you have this hornet in your apiary? Well, Vespa velutina has a very characteristic foraging behavior in the apiary. That behavior is called hawking. And that is where the adult female hornet flies to the nest entrance, but doesn't land on it. Rather, she hovers in front of it, facing the nest, or hovers in front of it, facing away from the nest, capturing bees coming out or bees going into the nest. She captures them while flying in the air. If you look at video, she's darting to an incoming bee or an outgoing bee. Once she captures that bee, she flies to a nearby landmark, maybe a fence post or a tree branch. Once she's there, she bites the head and the abdomen off of the bee, chews up the thorax, and returns to the nest to feed that bee's thorax to the offspring in that nest. Research has shown they can go through many kilograms of bees in a honeybee hive. So if you have multiple hornet nests hawking in your apiary, collecting bees, it can decimate the honeybee population in those hives. Those colonies can dwindle. Another behavior that the hornet elicits from the bees is this hawking threat can cause the bees to quit foraging. They will become paralyzed on the nest entrance. So you'll see all of these bees carpeting the nest entrance, unwilling to leave the nest because they know those hornets are out there waiting to capture them in flight. So you get colony paralysis, you get dwindling populations, and before you know it, your colonies are dead and there's happy hornets in the environment. So these things pose a major threat to honeybee colonies. In fact, when they moved to Europe European beekeepers or European scientists have struggled to find ways to address these issues. They were found in the southeastern United States in 2023, and since then, there's been large efforts to trap and control these nests. Let me pause for a moment and discuss with you how to identify this hornet. Not every wasp that shows up in your apiary is going to be Vespa velutina. I strongly encourage you to look up images of this and spend some time considering how it looks. Here in the US, we call it the yellow-legged hornet because it has yellow legs, but there are other wasps here in the US that also have yellow legs, so going by its common name is not overly diagnostic or descriptive. Furthermore, you likely already have wasps and hornets of some type in your apiaries. Maybe they're native wasps and hornets like we have here in the U.S. In the southeastern U.S., we have yellow jackets and bald-faced hornets, things like that. We have an introduced hornet called the European hornet. We've got things that don't show up in apiaries that look like the yellow-legged hornet. For example, the eastern cicada killer, another large wasp that looks remarkably similar to the yellow-legged hornet. But I am telling you this to be able to note the fact that identification is important. If you already know Vespa velutina is in your area, then you likely have learned to recognize it by its yellow legs, its dark body, and the various color patterns, its habits at your hive, things such as that. But if you do not have this wasp reported in your area and you think you might be seeing one, it's worth taking a picture or collecting a sample if it's safe for you to do so, and sending that picture or that sample to your local regulatory authority, often your apiary inspection program or your Department of Agriculture. So it is important to know that not every wasp that shows up at your apiary is Vespa velutina, and if you suspect you have it, take a picture, get a sample, and get confirmation, especially if it's not already present in your area, because this could trigger a regulatory need, the need for inspectors or regulatory agencies to come in and try to eradicate it before it establishes. So what can you do if Vespa velutina is in your area threatening your bees? The best defense currently is to find the nest that's causing the problem and eradicate it. A lot of initial efforts at controlling Vespa velutina has been focused on looking for these nests, destroying the colony contained within to reduce those predation pressures in the apiary. Now, this is difficult because it's usually the secondary nest that's causing all the problems. And as I told you earlier, their secondary nest is at the top of the tallest tree, usually in the area. So it's difficult to spot these things. So folks have used beelining or radio technologies to try to find these nests, and when they find them, get up to where they are and eradicate them. That's not something beekeepers themselves typically are able to do. So the second thing to do is use traps around the apiary to keep the pressures low at your nest. But there's competing thoughts here too. If you're setting out traps that have baits that attract hornets, are you simply attracting them to your apiary, at which point they'll pivot over to your bees? Nevertheless, at the moment, having traps peripheral around the apiaries, getting those hornets away from your bee colonies can help a little, but admittedly, that's not a very good defense according to current research. Another thing that folks do is something at the nest entrance to make it where the honeybees have a flying start before the hornet's waiting for them. For example, in Europe, they've tried what they call hive muzzles. So if you think about a muzzle over the mouth of a dog, a muzzle over the entrance of a hive so that bees have a half meter to a meter flying start before they fly through the contraption where the hornets may be waiting, and that might reduce predation pressures. Honestly, though, a lot of beekeepers who have these hornets in their apiaries sit in their apiaries and try to hit these things out of the sky. And I'm not kidding. You see videos online of people hitting them with badminton rackets or tennis rackets. I'm not saying that all beekeepers have to transition to doing that all the time, but I'm just saying physical control, killing the actual hornets that you see in the apiary, are things that people have tried. There's a lot of active research on this pest, and as it spreads around the world, people are trying to use chemical strategies to control it. They're trying to use other devices, which, for example, something they call an electric harp. That's basically these electrified wires like a bug zapper, and the hornets that fly through it will get electrocuted. There's a lot of effort going into controlling these things now, but I will be completely honest, it doesn't look overwhelmingly good. So a lot of cultural mechanical controls at the moment are things that people are investing in. Find the nest, eradicate the nest. Keep strong colonies, reduce the entrance, and if the hornet pressures are really high here, you may have to consider moving your bees. I will tell you, this is an active area of research globally. Hopefully, in just a few short years, we'll have better control strategies for this hornet. But it is a significant threat where it occurs. So one of the best defenses against this hornet is not letting it arrive to your location in the first place, which is why there's apiary inspection, research, regulation, all against moving bees, looking for these threats well before they come into your area so that you can mitigate them the best way possible, which is never have them. I will tell you, having watched this video, I'm sure you're going to want to know more about this hornet. You're going to want to look up Vespa velutina. There's a wealth of information available on the internet. It's an ever-evolving topic, and I hope that we have better control strategies soon. Until then, hopefully something I've shared with you will make you a more informed beekeeper if this particular hornet shows up in your area or is already present working on your colonies.